Hello and welcome to a special episode of Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Radcliffe. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today. It's going to be fascinating. On this special World Refugee Day show, we'll be joined by Newday Impact Investing's Doug Heske for a conversation with actor and activist Ger Duany. Ger started his life in South Sudan and was forced to become a child soldier. He was one of a generation of youth known as the Lost Boys in Sudan's civil wars. After escaping South Sudan, Ger found refuge in the United States. His book, Walk Toward the Rising Sun, chronicles the hardships the Lost Boys endured and his journey to the United States in the 1990s. Ger went on to become a model and won attention for his acting in films including I Heart Huckabees and The Good Lie. He also appeared this year in Goodbye Julia, which debuted as the first Sudanese film featured at the Cannes Film Festival. As his celebrity grew, Ger stayed true to his origins, becoming a passionate advocate for refugees, mental health support for refugees and former child soldiers, as well as for African environmental responsibility and sustainability. Ger has served as a goodwill ambassador at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and recently joined Newday Impact Investing, where he leads the advocacy, corporate engagement, and stewardship program, which focuses on corporate outreach and education in support of people displaced by climate change. As we prepared for this show, Ger used a phrase that I think captures the dire reality of the road ahead for the planet during the climate crisis. He said, "We're entering an era of displacement." On this World Refugee Day, we want to explore how private and nonprofit organizations are preparing for the era of displacement and what we can all do to ease the plight of those millions of people living apart from their homes and communities today. Are there ideas and investments that can prevent climate-related displacement? The deluge of refugees is only growing. So how can we help those who are forced from their homes by extreme weather, hunger, lack of potable water, or the conflicts that arise over scarce resources? We also will be welcoming another special guest in the second half of the show, so stay tuned. But let's get to our special guest, Ger Duany, who has an incredible personal story. You can learn more about Ger at gerduany.com. That's spelled Gerduany, all one word, no space, no dash, gerduany.com. And you can find out about Newday Impact Investing at newdayimpact.com. Newday Impact is all one word, no space, no dash. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Ger and Doug. How are both of you today? Ger, say hello to everybody.
Hello, Doug. Hello, Mitch. Thanks for having us here.
It's a pleasure to have you, Doug. Welcome to the show.
Mitch, thank you. Wonderful to see you again. And of course, Ger, great to see you and spend time with you this morning as well.
Yes.
So it is a very important day in terms of awareness, and particularly what we're talking about. Ger, I want to start off by asking about your childhood. You had an extraordinary childhood that most people would find unthinkable. And I want to start with, how did you hold on to the optimistic and generous relationship you have with the world during your time as a child soldier and a refugee? How did you do this?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I've lived many lives. So my life is set on an extended civil war between the north and the south of Sudan for over 21 years. And then it's a civil war that really killed about 2 million people. And then I was among the people that really survived. How did I hang on to myself? I always look for more. I always think that there's more to life than just civil war. Mm-hmm. And that I hope one day that I will become something, and then I can really help my people. There's something always motivated me, and then it make me love life for what it is.
I think that's such an important insight, that you have to be looking ahead and for more. How do you, when you're talking with somebody who has been displaced, whether by climate change or conflict, how do you help them deal with that sense of futility and overcome the hopelessness that is involved in being in that situation?
Well, let me tell you a story. I mean, South Sudan became a new nation in 2011. And then after 2 years later on, we plunged the country back into civil war that really killed thousands of people and displaced millions of us. Most of us are in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Sudan itself, and what other country? Congo, you know. So we were dispersed in all walks of country that's surrounding us. So the only thing that I can really do through my advocacy is to really go back to these refugee camps that I used to live in when I was a small boy. This like back in 1980, 87. So I went back there and just sharing my story and we just sharing our experiences as people who were displaced because I want them to understand, we are not just being defined by war. Mm-hmm. And also we are just not refugees and then that we should be looking to be given things. We are quite, we have a story to tell, meanings that, we are part of the humanity. So I always want to make sure that a younger person that live in a refugee camp understand that very well. And then these are the things that really motivated me. So I think refugees can do more, and then and that's why I go to these places, even if they are not safe.
Wow. That idea that we all have something to give is what makes us fundamentally human. But, people tend to think that escaping the crisis zone is when relief begins. But the refugee system itself is pretty violent and filled with a lot of trauma. Can you tell us what life is like as a refugee? What are people dealing with as they move to a new world in life?
Well, that's a good question. When I became a refugee in 1987, I was only like 9 years old. I walked 500 miles from Sudan all the way to Ethiopia. And then we walk over there and then, there's droughts, there's famines, and also there's animals that really kill us along the way, and also snakes. There's all kinds of things that you can really encounter when you live in your own homes. There's diseases, and most of us too, we die along the way because there's no medicine and there's no enough food for us to eat. So it was completely a devastating situation when you live in your own homes. And when you reach there, it's not like you're in a refugee camp and things just become better. Refugee camps are not very secure places. First, you have to deal with the violence among the people because people are really frustrated, and there's not enough food. It's not enough activities for you to be engaged in. And then also there's no opportunity. So I have seen so much violence in refugee camps that I was part of for so many years, for as long as I've been a refugee. And I live in 4 different refugee camps in East and Horn of Africa. So nothing is better. Life in a refugee camp is not a very easy thing for any of us. But you have to adjust, and your security always comes from people that you really live with, whether it's like your tribesmen or your ethnic groups. It's not like there's a law that, but UN is there. They can give you food, but that food is just like one day. Sometimes you can have like only 2 to 3 meals in 7 days. So people are frail and frustrated. So these are the things that I encountered when I was in refugee camps. Nothing is pleasant about living there.
When you arrived in the United States, you also had to deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome. What kinds of services helped you through that transition?
When I arrived in the United States in 1994, I remember May 23rd, 1994. I was 15, 16 years old, freshman in high school. I was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I didn't realize that those nightmares, they always come to you because you dealt with war. I dealt with war for like 10 years before I came to the United States. And I think what really helped me the most is sport gave me a ground. Playing basketball in Bloomington, Indiana in high school gave me a ground on how to really deal with my post-traumatic stress disorder. And later on, I extend that sport all the way to university where I play in NCAA. So it's physical activities help me. I believe so. And also help me integrate myself into American society.
Well, and obviously it also allowed you to give to the team, to the community that you were playing for.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. What are the 3 or 4 principles that you would recommend people embrace in order to be prepared for this flow of humanity that will be displaced by climate change? What are the values we need to be thinking about?
Well, above all everything that I cultivated in my life, I think love and faith and hopes. and care for other people that are really your friends and your family are things that any of us should be living for, because we are not here forever.
Doug, I want to ask you that same question because you've engaged with Ger. He now is part of Newday Impact. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But what values are you seeking to put into practice through the investments that you're making?
Yeah, it's I have reflected for a long time about this, certainly since meeting Ger for the first time several years ago. And the first thing that has come to mind is just empathy, number one, that we have here as Americans coming from a place of privilege, little understanding as to what it means to be a refugee or a displaced person. I'm hesitant to use displaced person because it depersonalizes the experience that people have. We almost should be coming up with a new name for people that are forcibly removed from their communities for a variety of different reasons. So we have to have some level of understanding of what it means to be pushed out of your home, whereby you've perhaps spent the majority of your life. These people are not going or leaving willingly. This isn't a decision that they want to make, right? They're making it because they can't survive or because they are under fear of threat or violence. So we should all give understanding to that as we give consideration to the plight of what is an extraordinary amount of people on a global scale that are being displaced today. And as host countries, we should be doing all that we can to respect their dignity, their security, their social connectedness or need of social connectedness, and their personal identities. And gain an understanding that refugees are in the process of building new lives in new communities. And that's a really, really tough thing to do. Like they're going into a place that culturally is incredibly unfamiliar with them, to them. And it's a fight that they're not just fighting on the way out of the countries that they're leaving, but as Ger had pointed out, in this really challenging circumstance that they're enduring in refugee camps and then thereafter in socialization in their new communities as well.
Well, and in addition to the people in the camps, the countries that are receiving these populations are also put under incredible additional stress. As you think about what Newday and the Advocacy, Corporate Engagement, and Stewardship Program are going to do, what are you thinking about how to balance the investments you're making in refugee care with the communities where those refugees are going to end up, which will need additional services and funding too? How do we untangle this incredibly complicated financial challenge?
You're right, and it is incredibly complicated. And one of the key areas of focus for us is really building financial resilience and identifying corporate organizations that are assisting displaced persons in building that social connectedness and new lives in their new host communities. And there are a lot of great examples on a global scale of organizations that have made it their mission to employ refugees into, new jobs as entrepreneurs and providing financial assistance to them as well. And it's a little bit different from country to country. Certainly, we have a job shortage here in the United States. And, the refugee community in general is or can be incredibly loyal. They're great workers. They're trying to find a way to indoctrinate themselves in the new communities in which they're relocating to. And so as a part of the work that we do at Newday through, in particular, through corporate engagement and advocacy, we, with the work that we're doing with Ger, are getting out there talking to organizations about how they can be responsible stewards in the community and supporting the refugee community.
Well, Ger, tell me about how you do that. What is a typical day in your role at Newday Impact like? Are you talking with companies? Are you talking with organizations?
Well, like Doug said, a typical day would be talking to a person like you in this important podcast, because all of these things that we try to do to really re-examines our society, our global society, they need a conversation like what we are having now. And Doug and I have been reaching out to a lot of different people, individuals, and my friends who are really in the corporate world, and also his networks. And then we have quite a number of people that we are reaching out to, and they really lending us an ear, and that's very important for me. This is the good beginning.
It doesn't seem like as a child you were probably thinking, I'm going to end up working for a financial services company someday. How did you two connect and get started in this relationship?
Well, hey, Mitchell, me, I have a lot of opportunities, so I did a lot of work, in the sense of like, I used to do a lot of modeling. And also I still do acting. So I had a good friend of mine named Georgie, which is a mutual friend between me and Doug. And that's who really introduced us. And then from there, Doug and I, we hit it off, and we just couldn't stop talking about how to talk about issues that really bother us globally.
Doug, did you have the idea of the advocacy and corporate engagement and stewardship program in mind already? Was it already up and running before you connected with Ger, or did we see this grow out of your relationship?
A little bit of both, particularly as it pertains to the refugee issue. So, we are very focused on this idea that advocacy and corporate engagement plus capital, and using capital as a tool for change, equals impact. And we run what is a diversity, equity, inclusion effort at the organization, which includes an investment portfolio that invests in public companies that are advocating for these core components of DEI, which we refer to as addressing gender-related issues, communities of color, displaced persons and refugees, the LGBTQ plus community, and then persons with disabilities. So this is a core component of the work that we do. And what we know is that if we want to advance these efforts in meaningful, deep, and long-lasting ways, it's got to include this corporate advocacy piece. Corporations today have more power than they've ever had on a global scale. They, in many respects, have been core contributors or chief contributors to the problems that exist today. So our determination is to build market-based solutions to get organizations to help fix these problems alongside us.
Here, you've also said that you make decisions about films or projects you're going to work on based on their alignment with your values. So what criteria do you use when you're deciding how to spend what's very valuable and influential time?
Well, every film that you ever make is always different from one another. And sometimes, we grow. We grow with time, and we get to learn what is important and what is not. So I currently, I did a movie. It's called Goodbye, Julia, and it's based on how my country split into two nations, Sudan and South Sudan. And I think the criteria that I used to really choose that film was the importance of the previous civil war, and then try to mirror the issue that really split this largest country in Africa to become two nations, and because of our differences. The criteria is family, very important, identity, because I think Sudan been going through conflict of identity for centuries, and also politics, So I chose that movie to do on those basis because I wanted to revisit a country that I was displaced, and while not knowing what is the custom of the people in the North Sudan, and why they introduced the Sharia law in the nation in the first place, while we live in the South as an African descendant. So I wanted to reach out to my people, and the best way for me is sometimes film.
Well, in addition to film, you've chosen to work with Newday, and you're doing a number of different things.
Yes.
Why is the market-based solutions that you all are seeking to encourage a good use of your time? And this is not meant as a challenge, but I'd really like to understand how you internalize the idea that money can result in productive changes.
Well, when money are being given in a very creative way, building things they have a meaning. So, what motivated me the most about the Newday is the fact that, I'm being inspired. I'm inspired just like anybody else. The impact is very important. And also, I looked at it from a leverage standpoint of things, because I've been doing advocacy for some time now. So Newday was a perfect team, and I like working with them.
Doug, what do you think about the question?
Yeah, so market-based solutions are essential to ensure that these global issues are addressed in really meaningful ways. Philanthropy is a great start and a necessary part of the work that we're doing. But we need to do more than just contribute capital or grant capital to this. We need to get the markets moving in a direction that build a sustainable solution for the future. And there are a whole bunch of different mechanisms associated with this. Certainly, Ger's film work that he's done is an important part of this. And, there is a seriousness about the issue that we're tackling here relative to refugees. And we're trying to balance that, like in a film, like Goodbye Julia, or the work that Ger has done historically, like with The Good Lie, with entertainment, right? And so there is an element of not dystopian storytelling, but almost utopian storytelling around this, right? So that we are influencing behavior in the broader public and building awareness so that people have a better understanding as to the work that they can do. And the challenge historically has been when you talk about refugees or displaced peoples, it doesn't necessarily convey the excitement that we have around addressing what is a really, really important issue, nor does it convey the peril that potentially we could experience as a result of the massive effects of climate change over the course of the next decade or two.
Yeah.
When these mass migrations of people on almost every continent in the world will be experiencing.
So what would you say are the greatest cultural and economic challenges facing Africa as the climate crisis deepens need to be addressed first and foremost?
My country, South Sudan, for past 9 years been going through a lot of challenges, and climate change being one of them, because it's a very flat land, and we have the White Nile. When the White Nile overflow, it kill a lot of our livestock. It kind of displace people, and then it create even conflicts among different ethnic groups fighting each other over the land, and that been happening. And then sometimes too, it created famine. Famine is not a good thing. For the people of South Sudan, they've been dealing with that for the past 3-4 years because of the water. So I think what we need to do is, people start to think creatively.
Mm-hmm.
People start to think creatively, meaning that even in one of my village, people start even to grow rice. We don't grow rice. We don't grow weeds. But if we can really increase that opportunity to really for people to think creatively, to produce their own food, and that would create what? Independence. So now they don't have to really look for food to be thrown from the air to, from a different part, with the airplanes, and then getting in the water, and then for people to go over there to go find the food is not really even it's going to be spoiled. So those kind of things need to be avoided. People need to, we need to just build the capacity of people how to think creatively, and education is always the best way to do it. And also injecting technology will really help a lot of people with the climate change.
Well, I think we're also talking about the fact that it's important to see through tragedy to opportunity, but we really get focused on the tragedy here. And Doug, I want to ask you, how can we help Africa not just get through this, but actually become self-sufficient and sustainable? What do we need to do in terms of investments and policy changes that you're trying to influence?
Yeah, Mitch, this is a great question at the core of the issue, and Ger's comments around self-reliance and sustainability are critical, right? It comes back to this idea that certainly this population of refugees aren't people that want to be leaving, their homeland, right? So what's the solution to that? The solution is fixing the problems where they are. And some of those circumstances are obviously incredibly challenging and complex, especially in war-torn nations.
Yeah.
When we think about the work that needs to be done as a global community, there are basically 5 or 6 things that we like to focus on, and they are climate action, climate-related issues, clean water and sanitation issues, conservation issues relative to wildlife conservation and even animal welfare, ocean health. And something that is core to all of this that runs through a common thread is equity, right? That people in their local communities need to feel like they are treated fairly and are building cultures of sustainability, right? And in order to get this work done, we understand that this is going to take a collaborative effort among corporations, government, faith-based institutions, nonprofit organizations, and NGOs. And the work that we are doing here with the UNHCR and Ger, organizations like the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is a partnership for us that's in development, is absolutely critical because we know that we can't do this work on its own. So maybe just one specific example, Ger had referenced Georgie earlier in the conversation, who's a mutual friend. She is also the leader of the Georgie Badil Foundation, which serves her home country of Burkina Faso in clean water, sanitation issues, and women's empowerment. They're doing amazing work in that area in her home country. Well, there are a lot of philanthropists and even corporate organizations that look at the water situation of Burkina Faso and say, well, let's go in and drill some new wells. And that's not what needs to happen. There are more than 6,000 broken wells in Burkina Faso today. And that's, more than enough wells to support the community. But what's not happening is that these wells are not getting repaired. So what the Georgie Badil Foundation is going out and doing are training women in the community to become engineers so that when a well breaks down, they're able to fix it. And so the other area that we're taking a very deep look at and will be expanding into new programs over the balance of 2023 and 24 is sustainable and regenerative ag. Mm-hmm. And we are in the midst of a changing planet right now. And, food source and food resources are going to be incredibly important over the course of the next decade, given the warming planet and lack of water access and whatnot. It's possible to re-engineer seed crops so that it will grow in a warmer climate, but that's not work that needs to start today. It should have started 10 years ago. And so it's, one of the most exciting parts of the work that we do today is we get to witness all of these really exciting opportunities that are all part of building this new ship for the future.
The question, though, just like starting a business or starting a nonprofit, is what do you focus on first? And it sounds like the regenerative ag is both a solution to restoring agriculture and agricultural productivity in many of these spaces, but also addressing the water table and so forth. What's the first project that you'll put in place?
Yeah, so none of these things happen in isolation. So, first and foremost, Ger brought up the idea of education and the importance of education. Mm-hmm. And we partner with an organization by the name of Generation Unlimited, which is part of UNICEF, which is doing job creation and work skills development for tens of millions of younger people around the world. Coming back to the water issue, that is foundational, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't get people to work on issues that are important in their community if they have an inability to survive because of lack of water or lack of clean water, sanitation, or food, right? So those are the things that we need to address first. So there is one specific project that we're working on related to water that essentially incorporates longer term thinking and structures of longer term nodes to support well water and what we identify at the Georgia Bedell Foundation as oases that are under construction to serve those local communities, which is a program that we expect over the course of the next couple of years to expand into other countries as well.
That's a great place for us to take a quick commercial break. I want to come back after this, and we're going to bring in the Norwegian Refugee Council USA's executive director to talk more about the scope of this problem. We'll be right back. And we are back to continue the conversation with actor and refugee activist Ger Duany and Newday Impact Investing's CEO, Doug Heske. But we're also talking about the power of market-based solutions. And I want to bring in another special guest now, Bernice Romero, who is the executive director of the Norwegian Refugee Council USA. They're an independent humanitarian organization that helps people forced to flee build a new future for themselves. And you can find out more about the NRC at www.nrc.no. Welcome to the show, Bernice. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining an important conversation. During my research, I read that by 2050, between 215 million and 1.2 billion people may be forced from their homes by climate change. And that's in addition to the 103 million people that are currently displaced due to conflict and disaster. Are these conservative estimates based on the pace of the climate change that you're seeing?
You know, I don't think that NRC or anyone for that matter has a crystal ball to know what exact numbers we'll be facing in 30 years' time. But if the present and the past are an indication, we know we'll be facing growing displacement. I mean, just between the end of 2021 and the middle of 2022, displacement grew by over 15%. So we know that this problem is growing and growing day by day. And we also know that weather events are the key driver for displacement within countries. And, you know, as we see the severity and the frequency of weather disasters increase, we can count on increased displacement as people are forced to leave their homes, not only in an emergency context, i.e. a hurricane hit and you have to evacuate, but also as the erosion over time of people's assets and sources of livelihoods decline. In a place like the dry lands of East Africa, for instance, drought means less crops, it means less pasture land, and that means less means to make a living.
So, on the one hand, we think of refugees as people who are displaced from their country, but you also just said that internal displacement is a major issue.
Yes.
Can we work with countries to make them more resilient in order to support their own people when there is a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that we do, for instance, is within a programmatic framework that we call economic inclusion. And that framework really seeks to give people the skills, the experience, the training that they need to become more self-reliant, but also to become more resilient so that they're able to absorb and survive these kinds of shocks when they come. So there are three aspects under that economic inclusion framework. There's legal inclusion, so looking at issues to do with having the correct documentation, advocacy in country to ensure the right to work, having documentation around your legal identity. We look also at social inclusion, which is how do we help internally displaced people as well as refugees build meaningful relationships with the new communities that they find themselves in. And we also look at financial inclusion, which is how do we ensure that people have access to credit and loans in their new environment? How do we train them to, start up businesses and do other things that contribute to self-reliance? And that's applicable both to people that are on the move within countries as well as people that are forced to cross borders.
Do you see the factors driving that displacement changing due to climate change? What kinds of amplifications of these problems are you expecting and planning for?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, that we believe that for lack of a better word, traditional drivers of displacement, conflict, violence, persecution, and human rights violations are going to continue to be on the rise. And what we are seeing is that climate change and weather impacts add an additional layer of complexity. So, for example, in Somalia, a record 1 million people fled their homes in just 130 days at the beginning of this year. And when we did an assessment of those drivers, we didn't see just one driver, but basically a combination of conflict, drought, and severe flooding. And we also saw that people were being displaced often for a second time. So, they were already in an informal settlement because they fled from a war and a flood hit, and then they were fleeing again. So what that means for us is that we really need to take a more holistic approach. And we need to look at not just addressing the immediate needs, but investing in people's resilience and their ability to find longer term solutions, to be more self-reliant, and move towards self-sufficiency.
It does seem like the era of displacement is the era of the polycrisis. You can't deal with one thing at a time. You have to deal with a lot of things. Ger, when you're speaking with people in refugee camps, what kinds of guidance do you give them? What do you tell them to pay attention to and when the opportunity presents to take advantage of in order to get out of the situation they're in?
Well, as a former refugee myself, so I tend to talk to the people who are refugees in refugee camps by telling them that life doesn't really start when you go from your own village to another area. Maybe you're being resettled to America, like how I was destined to come here. Life begins where you are. You can't think that I'm here in refugee camp and I wait until I find another opportunity that I can start life. If it really happened like that, none of us would not be even speaking about the refugees. So I think where the refugees are they should really even start their own life. They should really cultivate the skills that will really help them in case, civil war really may end in their own area, or maybe the droughts or the floods is really down. You will go back to your own village or your own land, having the skills on how to really take care of yourself and your family and your community. So I tend to tell people those kind of things because I use them myself. That's the reason I'm here and I'm speaking about the same issue.
How would both of you, Bernice and Ger, characterize some of the smaller changes that we can make personally to change our relationship with the planet so there's more resources for everybody else? I mean, to a degree, we're also talking about reorienting all the lives on the planet to a new reality. What's your advice about how to rethink our role in the world?
In my case, I think as an African and also as a person who have opportunity to come in this part of the world, Africa is there is a lot of resources there. There's no question about that. And then the best way is to really even organize youth into like corporate society where, you interject, the spirit of entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big market in Africa where you can really build a product and also sell it there. You don't even have to go and look for a market in any other place. For instance, we have a lot of fish in South Sudan. Some of our fish, they even die from the old age. We have a lot of shea butter, 500 metric tons of forests of shea butter that never been tapped into. So the resources are there. There's no resources that is needed. The only things needed is just the technology. And also, that would be a better tool. And the other thing would be just education for young people. And then they can really rely on themselves. They don't need anything outside the continent of Africa. I don't think so.
Bernice, what's your take on that question?
Well, when I look at it more the individual level, I think we need to start in the U.S. and in other relatively wealthy countries in sort of regearing the way we think about these issues. So number one, start from the point of a refugee or a displaced person as a protagonist rather than a victim, and think of them as, for lack of a better word, an ally, and a partner in bettering this world. I think we have a tendency to look at these terrible stats and think in terms of victimization. And it is important to continue donating to organizations like the NRC and to continue engaging in that way. But we can also engage with displaced people as other people like ourselves that are facing the similar challenges of a deteriorating planet in a lot of ways, of increased polarization politically, in their case, leading to violence. and really sort of reorient the way that we think about that and give support to some of these initiatives that really build on refugee-led projects that support inclusivity of women and other vulnerable groups, and that really take forward a local vision there, but one that looks a lot like our vision in our communities here.
Africa is a very unique economic environment because the continent essentially skipped the hardwired infrastructure that those of us in the global north are familiar with, telephone lines and a lot of fixed assets, and went directly to a mobile environment where vast numbers of people have mobile phones. There's a lot of opportunity for self-organization. I want to ask all three of you, how do you think we should rethink the African infrastructure to make it achieve what Ger described, which is to be a self-sufficient and prosperous continent where people are able to stay in place in their homes and be successful? Bernice, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start with investing in sustainable development initiatives, and that can be done from the donor level, i.e. the U.S. government, and the kinds of projects and programs that it chooses to support. I think that we as organizations, as humanitarian organizations and other organizations, can advocate to build awareness of what are the different investments that need to be made to make things more equitable and more sustainable, and just build awareness and build more connections and start exploring more innovative solutions through partnerships such as the one that we're exploring with Newday.
Doug, in terms of the U.S. investment as a nation, do you see our government working with private sector organizations like Newday to create these sustainable investments?
Mitch, we certainly hope so. I mean, this has been a frustrating circumstance given the current administrations or the previous administrations' perspectives on not just refugees, but immigrants as well. And like the real point here is that there is massive power in these economies, particularly in areas like Nigeria, who's one of the youngest populations on Earth today. What's missing right now is the skills development piece of this. So, you know, you can think about this from the perspective of agrarian economies and this younger population that don't necessarily want to grow up as farmers because they've watched their parents and grandparents toil at that career, right? But this is a business that is ripe for innovation right now. So it's getting those skills into the hands of younger people and ensuring that they have an understanding that, you know, the future of their countries are largely going to be based in innovation associated with the expansion of ag and water and these fundamental issues here as well. And that's the exciting piece of it for us. It's been interesting. I want to come back to your previous question around what we can do as well, because I think that as human beings, given the narrative that we suffer from every day with all of these issues, right, there is a helplessness or varying degrees of helplessness that people feel today around their ability to get engaged. But there's always work that individuals can be doing. You know, you can talk to, you know, government officials and lobby for policy change. And the U.S. needs to be doing much more in terms of being a community that welcomes in immigrants from around the world. And I think that ultimately what we want to do here is to build solutions through a combination of both market-based solutions and grant making that comes up with the practical solution in a circumstance where everybody has an opportunity to help.
We have tended to characterize the refugee problems as an us versus them, and they are coming for our borders, or going to penetrate our borders, or some horrible vision of badness. In fact, what I think we're talking about here is redefining who we are and taking the us and the them out of the we. So it's one big we, but then going back to where I grew up in the 60s when a rising tide was lifting all boats, but that was a national rising tide. Do we need to think about creating a global rising tide at this point? And is that the solution to climate change? Ger, how do you communicate the urgency of seeing everyone as part of the biggest community we could imagine?
Well, we always one big community globally, especially having a connection to internet for as long as I can remember. Me leaving my country 30 years ago, and then getting to reconnect with people even through social media and reaching out to me, and I'm talking about things that they never thought of, that I can tell our own story. It's a one way to really know that we are all connected. And today I'm here, and another day I'm in Sudan. For instance, I was just in Sudan and missed that civil war just for 1 month while I was making for 2 months over there, and then and all of a sudden I left there, and then the next thing you know is the civil war really displaced other 800,000 South Sudanese people who were displaced from South Sudan from our previous civil war, and everybody know what happened there all at once. The same things was happening in Ukraine. When we see the buildup. And then, and all of a sudden, it took only one bullet, and then here we are now. It's mass people are being displaced. So, and we all see what's going on. So I think we are all connected, and then there's so much that we can only do together.
Bernice, how can we pull together? And since you work for an organization based in Scandinavia, which is not, the center of the world in a lot of senses, how do you communicate the importance of that growing communal identity that we need to develop in order for us to be in a good relationship, not just with one another, but with the planet?
NRC, has three different parts to its work. One is humanitarian assistance. The second is supporting humanitarian assistance through the deployment of experts. But the third is policy advocacy, and underneath that, quite a lot of media work. So one of the things that we're doing and that I see Newday doing as well is really trying to amplify the stories of the refugees and the displaced people that we see and work with every day, and get that into the mainstream media so that people, see what's going on, and also see an image that isn't a statistic, that is a human being like we are, and that they can identify with. And then we do quite a lot of work here in the U.S. in advocacy and policy to promote policy solutions to a lot of the problems that we're seeing, and to remove some of the barriers that come up in the process of our trying to deliver assistance. So we are active on all fronts, both in giving aid, but also in promoting awareness here and in other countries of what's going on.
Doug, how does Newday Impact explain the benefits of the investments you're making in this program to the investors? Because there's both a financial return and a social, economic, and environmental return. How do you characterize to them what they're going to get for their money?
Yeah, so first of all, with reference to investing in public companies, or like what we like to say, investing with purpose, this is an easy answer, because organizations that run diverse communities of employees attract diverse communities of customers and clients, right? They broaden their perspectives as organization, and time again, they are delivering stronger economic performance, market returns, as a result of having what is a really skilled and diverse workforce. And that isn't just associated with refugees, but it is with reference to all of those other areas of DEI that we were previously speaking about. And that's a mandate that we have across all of the companies that we're investing today.
In terms of additional benefits of my investment, if I were putting money into one of your funds, there is the opportunity here to help raise the African economy and participate in it. Is that something not only investors need to be thinking about, but the U.S. in terms of our geopolitical strategy? do we need to make sure that the rest of the world is prosperous in order to retain our economic leadership? Not necessarily our moral or political leadership, but our economic leadership.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. And this is a massive consideration for, all advanced economies right now, that we haven't spoken directly about the social implications of all of this that are extraordinary. When you think about, hundreds of millions of people potentially being displaced over the next decade, and those people coming into Europe, coming into the US from South America and whatnot, that is going to be a big reckoning for us. So we need to be doing something about that today. And frankly, one of the advantages that we think we have as an organization is that as a part of these impact initiatives that we are developing and currently running, we're taking a portion of our revenues and contributing it back to our partner organizations, whom in most cases are the organizations that are most familiar with the issues, number one, but number two, doing the grassroots work that they and only they can do as organizations. Through our community of foundations and family offices, we are also encouraging those institutions to, as Bernice had said a few minutes ago, help us amplify the importance of the work that is being done here. And that's across the board, from broad citizenry to the institutional community, through everybody that potentially has a hand in helping us solve this issue.
It seems to me one of the ways, speaking specifically to Africa, that we could make the biggest impact would be to enable the circular economy there and perhaps allow that continent to be the leader in terms of recycling, reusing, really doing everything so much more efficiently so that there is enough for everyone that could set an example for the world. Ger, do you see this as a direction that the continent needs to be headed? In fact, let me ask it this way. If you were to sit down with African leaders today, what would you tell them to try to build in order to create the environment that we're talking about?
I think this investment in education opportunity for youth in Africa would be very, very key things to really straighten our continent. And every leader should really have that in mind.
And of course, that creates an efflorescence of creativity and innovation when people are well educated.
Yes.
Doug, in terms of additional investment in the infrastructure for circularity, do you see that as a priority for Newday?
We are in the process of examining that right now. So we largely operate in the public security space because large public organizations, oftentimes even related to technology and innovation, can be sort of public company incubators for a lot of important technology. And so we're not making private investments today. We are giving consideration to that as something that we evolve to over the next couple of years. It's important to address both. I mean, there's a lot of excitement that goes on relative to innovative technologies, but when you measure them all in aggregate, today, the impact that public organizations can have, given their massive footprints, is far more significant than the capital that's contributed to organizations that are driving innovation. What's important is that both paths are pursued.
Bernice, even in a refugee camp, could we be engaging in education and examples of circularity in order to create that movement that we're going to need to make countries resilient and supportive of their populations even when they're displaced?
Yes, and to a certain extent, we are doing that. At the NRC, for instance, we're looking very much at our own operations and setup. So we are establishing what we're calling a green fund to solarize all of our operations, any of the camps that we are operating in, et cetera. And really looking first at ourselves, frankly, and the footprint that we're leaving in how we do our work. So there are various initiatives that look at, solar cook stoves, different initiatives that our sector engages in to build more of that awareness and look at building that up in places where people are settling.
Ger, what are some of the projects you have planned in the next few months or in the next year to amplify and create awareness around the refugee crisis?
Well, I've been going back home, back and forth, and it's still, we still have a lot of internally displaced persons in South Sudan, in Juba, and all across South Sudan, and also we still have millions of people outside the country because of our previous civil war. So what I really encourage when I'm out there is like I saw opportunity in my country where we could really have projects that really create jobs for young people. Like I saw the opportunity in the fishing industry, and that need to be organized. And then and also, like I said earlier, the shea butter is another product that is in the country, and but we have to educate our people, how to really organize themselves, and then they can come back home and then knowing that they can create jobs for themselves. So I'm interested in the field of private sector in my country.
So let me ask each of you, but beginning with Ger, how can our listeners take an action today to support your work and the refugees who are currently struggling with being displaced?
I think there's a lot of things that anyone can really do where they are. You can talk to your local people, your local authority, and you can come and listen to some of the conversation that we are having today, and then you can really see exactly what's the Newday is doing, and how much work NRC been involved in for as long as I can remember them as an organization, because I'm part of the team in Washington D.C. So I would like everybody to really lend us an ear and come join us.
Bernice, how can people follow along with what NRC is doing, as Ger was saying?
You can do a couple of things. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at @NRC_Norway, or go to support.nrcusa.org. But to answer your question about what people may be able to do more generally, I think there's often a perception that Americans don't care about what's going on in the rest of the world, that we're largely domestically focused. And that message has been very internalized by a lot of our members of Congress. So getting involved in advocacy, targeting your Congress people and showing that you care about these issues is actually an important step in, I think, getting more engagement, more policy engagement. And we know that where there's more international attention by policymakers and large, important governments like the US, more attention goes to those crises and more funding goes to that. So that's one step people can take. Another step is really to fund the work of NRC and other organizations in the sector that are working to meet the immediate needs, as well as brainstorming and forming partnerships with organizations like Newday to think through new and innovative ways to help people, and hopefully to build a context where people will be resilient in the face of these shocks. People will be self-reliant once they are already affected. But even better would be where people are not forced to flee in the first place.
From your lips to God's ears. Doug, what about what Newday is working on, and how can folks back your efforts?
Yeah, so there are three things that we have always, as our organization has been growing over the last 6 years, been committed to. And those three things are what we define as getting informed. So make sure that you're aware of the issues. It's listening to things like this. It's sharing this podcast with friends and family. It is using your voice to advocate for change, as Bernice was just sharing. It's about getting involved and engaged, right? And there is work that all of us can do. So talk to your, local congressmen and senators about advocating for policy change here in the United States relative to the broader issues pertaining to refugees. It is, we live in this social media world today, and particularly for the younger generation, it's be a loud voice. You're not incapable of making a difference, but if you feel about a particular issue in a certain way, then get out and talk about that, right? And try to use your voice for influence. And then the third piece, of course, is around the investment piece. So invest in organizations that are making a difference, right? Mm-hmm. And these are typically organizations that are performing quite well. They're easy to find. They are reflected in the Newday investment portfolio, that are not just tied to general refugee issues, but the more general DEI issues as well. And explore. I mean, this is a learning experience for all of us, but something that is so incredibly important that we embrace on a go-forward basis.
We're going to find our way out of this together. That's the only way out of this. And I want to thank each of you for sharing how you're trying to make a difference. Ger Duany, Doug Heske, Bernice Romero, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a special World Refugee Day conversation with actor, activist, and author Ger Duany, whose book, Walk Toward the Rising Sun, is a must-read for people who want to understand the refugee experience, along with Doug Heske, CEO of Newday Impact Investing, and Bernice Romero, Executive Director of the Norwegian Refugee Council USA, which is an independent organization helping people in the era of displacement find and build new lives. We'll share links to all their sites and the programs that they operate in the article that accompanies this podcast. Ger Duany's optimism and his care, his belief in the efficacy of individual initiative, as well as his lack of anger at the people and circumstances that led to his becoming a refugee, are inspiring for me. That kind of grace can inspire change for the better. The question is how to amplify and extend that positive approach to every corner of the planet for everyone's benefit, including the other species with whom we share this planet. The topic of refugees is often described in terms of war and invasion and us versus them conflict at the borders, instead of an opportunity to find shared solutions that transcend borders and raise the standard of living for all. If we can bring the values of love, faith, hope, and care for others to life through public policy, charitable organizations, and private investment, we might just revitalize the hopes that society had when the Cold War ended about 34 years ago. Since then, climate change has leapt into public awareness, complicating this challenge and creating more despair and displacement than even war once did. Today's conversation suggests that we can overcome these challenges together. It will take a determined effort to look past the boundaries of our immediate communities to see and embrace all humanity as partners in reinventing the world to create a sustainable, restorative relationship with nature. And I hope you'll visit gerduany.com, the Norwegian Refugee Council's nrc.no website, and consider making ethical investments to support equitable growth. Check out newdayimpact.com to learn about their impact portfolios, which address issues ranging from clean water and diversity, equity and inclusion, to ocean health and fossil fuel-free investing. And keep an eye out for our next Newday Impact Environmental Influencer conversation. It's coming up later early in July, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. Folks, would you take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 400 interviews we produced on sustainability in your ear? Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. So please be the amplifiers that spread more ideas that we can create less waste. Tell your friends, your family, and coworkers they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and other purveyors of podcast goodness that they may prefer. Thank you so much, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.